This portion of the Our Water, Our Future presentation focuses on public utility challenges, solutions, and opportunities. During the next few minutes, I plan to discuss a utility manager's perspective as it relates to water in our area, anticipated growth and demands, water quantity challenges, water quality challenges, utility projects and initiatives, project costs and future rate implications, and finally, solutions and opportunities. As a public utility manager in West Volusia, there are a number of things that keep me awake at night. One is increased water demand, obviously due to growth. That also implies more wastewater to treat and dispose. We try to be good stewards of the environment, so we look at things like wetland impacts, sustainable discharge, residuals disposal from our treatment facilities. We need to make sure that we have sufficient supply and safe drinking water. We need to be concerned with renewal of aging infrastructure, regulatory compliance, and very importantly, we have to provide affordable service to our ratepayers and citizens, and we have to make sure that the public understands the value of water. Even though growth occurs in fits and starts, anticipating growth and demands is really essential for utility managers. Volusia County's population is approximately 600,000 at the present time, and the annual rate of growth is about 1.5% per year. In 2019, the combined potable water demand for the West Volusia utilities, that's Orange City, Deltona, DeLand, and the County of Volusia, was about 21 million gallons per day. Projected demand in 2024 is about 25 million gallons per day, and in 2035 about 29. At present, there are 6 major municipal wastewater treatment plants in West Volusia. In addition, there are lots of septic tanks, more than 26,000 on lots smaller than 1 acre in the Blue Spring primary focus area. Let's introduce some terms and acronyms that relate to the regulation of water in our area. First is the MFL, or minimum flows and limits, which are limits beyond which further withdrawal from the aquifer or from surface water would be significantly harmful to the water resources. Next would be consumptive use permits. These are permits that are issued by the St. Johns River Water Management District or other districts elsewhere in the state, which define the maximum annual and daily withdrawals allowed from either the aquifer or surface waters. Next are the Basin Management Action Plans, or BMAPs, and this is basically a plan or a master plan, a list of projects which, if implemented, will provide compliance with the target pollution limit. Clearly a quality-related, water quality-related term. And finally, the Tmdls, or total maximum daily loads, and this is the concentration or pounds of pollutants introduced on a daily basis or an annual basis, which are considered to be, beyond which is considered to be harmful. And so for Blue Spring, they've established, for example, a nitrate nitrogen limit of 0.35 milligrams per liter, which is considerably lower than the current concentrations, about a 45% reduction overall loading required. So to recap, water quantity challenges are addressed by the minimum flows and levels, the MFLs, and also consumptive use permitting. And the water quality challenges are addressed by the total maximum daily load and BMAP concepts and regulations. One of the more interesting and frankly unique MFLs, or minimum flows required for spring in the state of Florida, involves Volusia Blue Spring right here in Volusia County. This is because the Volusia Blue feeds the spring run, which is the cold water refuge for the manatees, the West Indian manatees. And when the regulations were developed in the early 2000s, it was determined that an increased population of manatees would need a longer spring run, or a longer warm spring run, and that an increasing amount of flow from the spring would keep that spring run warm. And so a graduated MFL was put in place, and it's almost fully implemented. By 2024. The spring flow of 157 CFS will need to be implemented. And just to give you an idea how much flow that is, 1 cubic feet per second equals about 0.65 million gallons a day. 157 cubic feet per second equals over 100 million gallons per day. And this is important because, as I mentioned earlier, the combined demand of West Volusia is on the order of 20 to 25 million gallons per day of water. It does not all come out of the spring run, and even if all the wells were turned off, it would not equate to 25 million gallons per day of additional flow. It would only be a small part of that because the groundwater withdrawal doesn't directly affect the spring, but it does reduce the water table elevation and the flow to the spring to some extent. So, a 1 million gallon per day reduction in pumping probably equals 0.1 million gallons per day reduction in flow from the spring. Nonetheless, the municipal pumping and pumping from all wells in the Florida aquifer in this region around the springs does impact the spring flow. On the water quality side, as I mentioned, Tmdls and BMAPs are the performance measures, if you will, that we go by to make sure that we have good quality, or try to attempt to get good quality in our streams and surface waters. These parameters are regulated by both the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the U.S. EPA. As I may have mentioned, the nitrate reduction required for Blue Spring is 45%, and the nitrate limit, the TMDL, or total maximum daily load, is 0.35 milligrams per liter. I would note that although nitrate is the primary constituent that's sampled and measured, that the nitrate is an indicator parameter for other contaminants of concern, and it's assumed, right, wrong, or indifferent, that if the nitrate concentration is reduced, then other parameters like phosphorus and organic material and so forth are similarly reduced due to the higher levels of treatment provided. Scientists and regulators and utility providers frequently use the term spring shed or spring basin to define the area that influences both the quality and quantity of water in a given spring. For Blue Spring, the spring shed basin is shown or depicted on this map with the dotted line, and basically the way that line was drawn was geologists used the concept that a drop of water falling on the ground would have a travel time to the spring of 100 years or less. So a drop of water that falls into land may take 90 or 100 years to actually get to Blue Spring. This is all very theoretical. It assumes a kind of a homogeneous aquifer. As we know, the aquifer varies from place to place in density, and the amount of flow that can pass through it changes. But generally, if there's a well that withdraws water outside the 100-year capture zone, or something that introduces contaminants outside there, we're not too worried about it in the Blue Spring Basin. Now, it obviously has concern to the bodies of water closer to the discharge or withdrawal. Contamination of our groundwater, our springs, and our surface water comes from a number of sources, and it varies by land use. In some areas, the predominant contaminant is, for example, septic tanks, and for Volusia Blue, the Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, determined that the septic systems were responsible for about 54% of the contamination in the spring. Wastewater treatment plants, for example, account for about 8% of the contamination. Wastewater plant reuse, about 4%. Urban turf grass and fertilizer, about 22%. As I mentioned, this varies. If you note, for Gemini Springs, for example, septic systems and fertilizer are about equal. And in DeLand Springs, fertilizer is the predominant form of contamination, probably followed by fertilizers and, urban turf grass, fertilizer, and septic contamination. Solutions to some of these problems from a municipal government standpoint include reducing the amount of water that's used by whatever methods are possible. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but conservation is certainly important. Demand management, which makes people use less water because of the cost of water. Improving citizen awareness through education are all important tools that we use. We also promote the use of lower quality water for irrigation, in most cases reclaimed water, enhanced groundwater recharge by putting water in ribs, rapid infiltration basins, and other things of that nature. And we try to develop alternative water supplies that are farther away from the springs and surface waters in question, such that they have less impact. As far as the water quality issues, we've certainly tried to upgrade our wastewater treatment plants to remove the maximum amount of nutrients we can. We expand our sewer service areas to eliminate septic tanks, and we try to reduce stormwater nutrients from fertilizer, leaves, and debris. Regarding conservation, we know that this is really only a partial solution to reducing our deficit. Conservation efforts need to focus on outdoor use because upwards of 40% of system demand is attributed to irrigation. In some cases, it's even more, up to 60%. Conservation is effective only if it's implemented with a significant focus. We need to change our land development regulations and not require as much landscaping that needs to be irrigated, minimize irrigated turf, and so forth. And then finally, conservation requires a very significant investment, both in terms of education and frankly, enforcement. But it is less costly than treating surface water, desalination, or some of the other methods. Demand management has been very effective in reducing the amount of water that is consumed by the public. And what I mean by demand management is that we have a system in virtually all of our municipal government rates in West Volusia, where the more water that a customer uses, the more they pay per 1,000 gallons. The unit rate increases. So this is an example for DeLand, for a residence that uses a relatively small amount of water, a lifeline amount, if you will, just for drinking and bathing and washing clothes. The rate's only $2.30 per 1,000 gallons. So it is very affordable. However, this rate goes up, and as customers use more and more water, primarily for irrigation or swimming pools or what have you, that rate goes all the way up to $7.14 per 1,000 gallons. And those are the customers that get water bills in the hundreds of dollars. Some of them don't care, but a lot of people do. They realize they're making a purchasing decision when they buy water. Similarly, we have a block rate structure for reclaimed water. That rate's a little less, but it increases a little bit every year, and the value of reclaimed water is becoming closer to that of potable water. Utility suppliers in West Volusia participate in the Save Our Springs and Rivers initiative, which addresses the issues in Volusia Blue Spring BMAP. This is a 3-year outreach and education program funded by the EPA, and it focuses on reduction of septic tank nutrient discharge, fertilizer contamination, and groundwater pollution. And there's the link there to www.greenvolusia.org. And of course, we're very pleased to participate with the Volusia Water Alliance in this symposium series, one of which is part of this program is part of. The Alliance has also put out a homeowner's guide, a yard sign that talks about the water pledge. We have a water symposium that during non-COVID times we'll be able to meet in person and have some talks and stuff like this. The Water Festival, which is an outdoor fun exhibit in downtown DeLand, and you can find out more about this by contacting VolusiaWater.org. As mentioned, a lot of pollution that occurs in our springs and surface water, rivers, and so forth is the result of septic tank discharge. And the purpose of this slide is just to illustrate what happens in a septic tank. Obviously, the flow goes to literally a tank, and then there's some treatment that occurs in that tank due to bacterial decomposition, and the water is discharged into the soil through a drain field and flows into the groundwater. Septic tanks are pretty good at protecting public health, reducing contamination of some organic constituents, but don't do a good job of removing nutrients. Wastewater treatment plants are capable of reducing contaminants, both organic and nutrients, to much lower levels than septic tanks. For this reason, it's desirable to have more flow go to the wastewater treatment plants and have less septic tanks out there, and it reduces the overall loading. There are more than 50,000 septic tanks in Volusia County, and frankly, more are being permitted every day. A lot of them are in West Volusia, particularly close to Gemini Springs, close to Blue Spring, in the Deltona area, in Orange City, DeLand, and in the unincorporated areas. Once septic tanks are installed, it's costly and difficult to eliminate them. Retrofitting neighborhoods that have septic tanks so that they're placed on city municipal sewer costs $15,000 to $20,000 per residence. There are ways to upgrade septic tanks and drain fields. The cost for that is pretty high, and there is an annual maintenance and operations cost. Involved in that program is the actual construction of the sewers, but beyond that, there's the physical connection that has to be done by a plumber, abandoning the septic tank, and then the payment of sewer impact fees to the receiving utility and monthly sewer charges. And this is complicated by the fact that many septic tank owners have low to moderate income and really just can't afford to participate in the cost. Nonetheless, as grant funding and funding from municipal governments becomes available, sewer retrofit projects are undertaken. In DeLand, for example, we have the Spring Hill area, an area that was historically underserved, where we have installed a number of gravity sewer lines, improved the water system, and obtained some grants to help low and moderate income residents connect to the sanitary sewer. These are some photographs of some of that construction. You can see that the deep holes that need to be dug for the sewers and install the sewer lines is very extensive, and you can imagine some project like this coming down your street. It's a costly and disruptive undertaking. So as time goes by, our utilities will need to construct additional water production and treatment capacity to provide more quantity of water for their customers, and they'll have to construct additional sewage treatment plant capacity and upgrade the plants to make sure we get the maximum amount of nutrient removal that's achievable. Have to expand distribution of reclaimed water, and we'll have to participate in septic to sewer conversion. Funding for these projects comes from several sources. Impact fees, that's fees that we charge developers as they build their new homes, and of course these are passed on directly to the buyers, to the new homeowners. User rates, which we charge all the customers that use the system, and grants, and hopefully in the future, the grants will be available due to some of these infrastructure programs and continuation of existing programs. In DeLand, most of the projected costs that we have, which total $30 to $40 million, have been incorporated in the current rate structure. And we've anticipated these costs and have tried to reserve some funds so that there's not a big rate shock. This may vary in other jurisdictions, however. So what are some opportunities? First, I think we need to raise public awareness of the issues and encourage and support infrastructure investment, and also the purchase of environmentally sensitive lands. We all need to support conservation and Florida-friendly gardening. We need to think big in terms of septic tank conversion, upgrading our wastewater treatment plants, developing new sustainable water supplies. And finally, we need to position our communities to receive the maximum grants from state and federal sources as they become available. And in many cases, this means being ready to put some skin in the game. In other words, provide some local matches so that we can get as many grants as we can. So as far as the bottom line, I'll tell you that West Volusia utilities are trying to provide the best possible environmental stewardship that they can, and at the same time be good stewards of our taxpayers and ratepayers' limited financial resources. Needed improvements are very costly, and so we need all the help we can get to educate the public so they support state and federal funding and supply necessary local matching funds. Well, thank you very much for your kind attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions.